Hemshech Hayim Beis, Volume 1, middle of chapter 164. On a very fundamental chapter, as all chapters are, but this one particularly so. So, a little overview. It's called the driving question in all of Ayin Beis, you could say all of Chassidus, all of Kabbalah, is addressing the issue of Achdus Hashem, which is divine unity. How can we reconcile between a multifarious universe, a finite universe, limited in so many ways, as an inherent fashion? How do you reconcile that with godliness and with God? Now, obviously, all this would not be a question if we did not have the commandment of Hashem Echad, and which is a mitzvah in the Torah, Liyachad es Hashem Yisbarach, which is to discover the unity of the divine with our existence. And more than that, that we should have a relationship with God, loving one, Avos Hashem, Yiras Hashem, one that knows God to the extent that we are allowed to know, we are able to know. So there's a fundamental dilemma, because God and universe are so different, so antithetical, the creator and the creatures, and the creation. Chassidus, especially Chassidus Chabad, the Alter Rebbe makes it a point. Like if you look at the beginning of Shai Yuchad V'Amunah, the second section of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe begins the introduction on top, Levaya, to explain how there's the Yuchad of Hashem and Elokim, how's the Yuchad, the unity. Because seemingly, on one hand, existence exists, we cannot say it's an illusion. On the other hand, the divine exists. And there's no duality, there's no plurality. So how does that work? So, as I said before, without the mitzvahs that I mentioned and the way God's plan, you could say, it's none of our business. Whatever works, and that's it. We should be servants following the orders of the master, and we don't have to necessarily understand this. But clearly, you see from the entire Torah, and Chassidus makes a big point of it, that, as I said, there's an element of us unifying, of us appreciating God's unity and understanding it, and of relating to godliness. Which means, if we say, B'chol derech De'eo, in all your ways you should know God, and you say that in our fragmented and limited world, we should experience godliness, and when Mashiach comes, it says there'll be Mol Ha'aretz De'as Hashem, the world will be filled with divine knowledge, and everything in the universe will be aligned with the divine. Clearly, it's more than just a simple explanation that God created it all and we don't have to understand it. A big part of it is understanding, to know. And that's part of how we unite with it. So if we were not creatures of intelligence, you could say, okay, fine, just follow the orders like animals do. Animals don't need, they don't have a mitzvah to discover unity. We do have such a mitzvah, and we have a mind that has questions, and the questions are very obvious. So besides the obvious question, where is God, and why don't we see Him, and why is it so difficult to experience godliness in this world? There's, once you even understand what God is about, how do you do it? And above all, and maybe this is the most important point, this isn't just about philosophical awareness. This is also about how we live our lives. The fact of the matter is, we live fragmented lives. We have thousands of different voices and forces tugging at us in many directions. And if you don't find a unifying element, a divine unifying element, then we are living basically a multiplicity type of life. I'm not saying duplicity necessarily. It's duplicity too, duplicitous. But definitely many different voices. You have your work, you have your home, you have your eating, your sleeping, there's your religious duties, there's the list goes on. Social, cultural, entertainment, essentially would really mean relegating it all, that, try to find in every place how you do it for God, but they would have a big problem because they're very different. Yom Kippur and Shul, you could say then I can connect, but in the middle of a Sunday, it's a weekday that has no particular spiritual energy. Where do you connect then, and how do you connect? And we say at the same time Hashem Echad, that it's one God in all of them. So this isn't just a philosophical question, it's a personal question. Can we find harmony in our lives? Can we find seamlessness? Or are we also made up of a bunch of different parts dragging us in many different directions? So the deeper we understand the unity between our existence and our personal lives with our divine purpose, the more unified we become. Even science looks for the unified field principle. And a human being, all of us, without that type of sense of unity, we have to ultimately become drained or worn out by the different so-called pressures and the demands that are upon us. So the Meraglim wanted to take one approach. Let's not deal with the material world, let's stick to the spiritual. Let's stay in the wilderness, and God will protect us. Let's stay in a kollel, in yeshiva, like staying in the mother's womb. So we'll be in the physical world, and we'll do some mitzvahs, but primarily we won't have to deal with the Wall Street marketplace and all the pressures of Eretz Echel Yeshveh, a land that consumes its inhabitants. We know clearly that was not the kavanah, it's not the purpose. Kairach, hearing that, went the other extreme. We'll stick all the way, we'll immerse ourselves in materialism, we'll indulge in it even, and everywhere there's God. And we know that becomes the other opposite extreme. So how do we find balance? On one hand, we're supposed to be in this world. Then God says, I compel you. And even while we're here, we have to feel compelled. And then when a person comes to the end of their life, they don't want to leave because the purpose of mitzvahs is in this world. So you have, wherever you twist it, wherever you turn, you have full of questions of trying to reconcile two realities that don't seem to be don't have any commonality. And this is the compelling question of Chassidus, and I am based particularly. He calls it mamutza, interface. And as we discussed at length, the interface is basically a bunch of stepping stones. How we go from here, and we climb the ladder to there, from earth to heaven. So Matan Torah, we're told, as we've learned also, eliminated the schism, the breach between spirit and matter, between energy and matter. But that doesn't tell us how to do it. That just tells us we have now the power to do it. The split is still very deep in our lives because matter and spirituality, materialism and spirituality don't work together. They actually fight with each other. And yet we're told there's ways to climb this ladder and there's ways to reconnect. And like any good interface, it's not one interface, it's millions of interfaces. Think of it, of all the switches necessary to connect these pipes. But as I discussed, the switches are not all the same. They're not just one long pipe from Alaska to New York, and you just need to have connectors between one pipe and the next. That's just a matter of quantity. Here they're qualitatively different switches, because as you climb, you're going from the material to the more sublime, and the more sublime. And as you climb, each switch plays a different role. So in Ayim Beis, really he lays them out, one after the next, what these switches look like, which really are meant to be really for us instruments, tools for us to climb. First of all, for how God manifests down below, and then for us to retrace the steps. So every switch works two ways. It brings the divine energy into existence and allows existence to connect to the divine. So I'm not going to go through the whole summation of everything we learned, all the interfaces. That it definitely, I've been documenting it in my own notes, and I will be listing them because they're in each few chapters. The Rebbe Rashab goes through another one of them. We talked about Atzilus, we talked about energies and containers, we talked about Torah, and now we're entering the world of Adam Kadmon. So here's the situation. We want to have the deepest possible relationship with the divine. We don't want anything compromised. We don't want existence compromised. We don't want godliness compromised. Then therein lies the dilemma. If one were compromised, it wouldn't be so complicated. Let's use ourselves as an example. two spouses. So it says kosher kriyas yamsuf. It's difficult to bring together a couple as kriyas yamsuf. Why? Because number one, ein day saying Shabbos. Two people don't have the same thoughts. Secondly, male or female. Thirdly, they're strangers. They don't even have the same commonalities. They don't come from the same culture necessarily, the same family, same home, from the same community. So all that bundled together, the likelihood is that they're not going to agree about many things. So you need to have a memutza. You need an interface to bring them together. But we're told it's not just a miracle. We're told we can work on it. We don't just say, but we pray to God, make kriyas yamsuf every day in our marriages. God does what He has to do, and we have to do what we have to do. What do? You find commonalities. You find areas. You find the areas that... Now, it would be simpler if one compromised. That way, if there was ever a disagreement, the wife defers to the husband, or the husband defers to the wife. That would be a simple solution. But then you don't have a relationship. Then one is being compromised. One's personality and identity is being annihilated, which we know exists in relationships, and sometimes very mutually so. There's the aggressor and there's the passive one, and they worked well together, but that's not a relationship. A relationship is a shutfus, is a partnership. Neither are compromised. So the same thing is with divine in existence, which is also a marriage, the marriage of heaven and earth, Matan Torah. Chasanasa is a Matan Torah. It's also a relationship, and you don't want compromise, which would of course solve a lot of problems. So all the discussions, the different Kabbalists, of how they understand Atzilus, and how they understand Eretz, and how they understand Kalim, which I'll soon discuss, and how they understand the Tzimtzum, or they don't understand the Tzimtzum, or they don't know of the Tzimtzum. They're all different ways, all dealing with this dilemma. So there are the Kabbalists, for example, that hold that the divine manifests in two tracks. Well, everyone holds there's two tracks. There's energy and there's containers. In simple terms, there's a body and there's a soul. God wants a yesh, He wants a table, but He also has divine energy in the table. The energy reflects the divine purpose in everything. And the body reflects the divine intentions in it. And the body reflects the purpose where it plays itself out. So think of it letters on a page. And the idea is that the letters convey. The ideas are the letters and the words are kalim. When I'm speaking right now, the words I speak, the actual words you hear are containers, but they're conveying ideas. So in this world, because it's a tangible world of tachtenim, of a material tangible world, you need to have substance. You need identity. You need personality. You can't just say it's all sublime, it's all amorphous. You need expression. On the other hand, you can't just have a world of inanimate entities. You need direction. You need guidance. So gives guidance. Brings energy, reveals energy. So let's say sometimes Torah is compared to mitzvah is compared to kalim. A mitzvah, you take a pair of tefillin, you take some cloth, parchment, the way you combine it, you put it on. Torah illuminates how you do the mitzvah, why you do the mitzvah, the kavanah of the mitzvah. So both work together. In a sense, you could say carries the divine instructions. It's a divine expression, and in a revealed way, because all it is a energy. It's reflecting the expression, what the divine wants, what the source wants. Kalim, on the other hand, express what he wants, not what the actual object, where he wants it played out. So you need both together, and that's how it works. Or else we would not be able to. For example, if you can have all the objects in the room, and if you have no light shining in the room, it's dark. You can have the whole world standing there without the Torah without you don't know how to use and how to reveal the divine in everything. So even though it may be there, but it's concealed. So you need both. In a way, you could say in the human being, we have our faculties, but we have them from birth. Developing them. In Yiddish, entwickeln, developing them, expressing them is the key. So to say that a student has a good mind, that's very nice. Like the Alter Rebbe told that student of his, that a scholar is not someone who could study, but someone that studies. Just like a thief is not someone who could steal, but someone who steals. So actualizing is the key. So the kelim are there, but the makes it come alive. The neshama brings out the power and energizes the body. So you have both tracks. And so there are now Kabbalists that hold that fundamentally the real divine energy doesn't have any shape and form or identity. And therefore, when the unity takes place and the keli connects to the energy, so to speak, the container, the identity connects to the energy, the focus is not on specific individual identities. In a way, subtly, it's like a little like the opinion of the Rambam, that ultimately souls is going to be the ultimate reward, because the body is too limited to really experience the divine in the highest level. And then there are Kabbalists that hold, which is the opinion held by the Rebbe Rashab here and follows, and the Alter Rebbe brings both opinions, that the energy too has particles, has identity, has chesed and gvura. And therefore, the divine energy, not just the containers, divine energy also reflects in some way, expresses itself in specific ways, which makes the unity far deeper than the first opinion. So these are just really two opinions of how the Achdus works, the unity I was describing earlier. I'm not going to elaborate on this because this was discussed in previous chapters and at length. I'm just mentioning it because it's relevant to where he leads to here. When he says earlier that the interface of Atzilus is the Eiris represent the divine, the Kelim represent the structure of existence. So remember, the Kelim here are still how they are divine containers, but they are instruments that can relate to the structure that will ultimately become the structure of existence. And as he spoke earlier, we discussed this at length, Chachmei Chachmatata, and Eiris and Kelim. That's the key difference between the two parts of the interface. This too in Torah also has these two elements that we discussed in the previous chapters. Because Torah is Chachma, and wisdom becomes ultimately also an interface. Because wisdom is already human intelligence that human beings can relate to. At the same time, it's still only the spark, only the first expression of something coming from a divine realm that is not yet fully developed and fully fleshed out in Bina. So Chachma becomes the interface where so-called the divine Keser, total ayin, total bittul meets existence. Now, in the chapter that we're right now presently, he's going now deeper. He's going to discuss what Adam Kadmon's role is, the role of the interface of Adam Kadmon. But to understand this, we have to understand a fundamental question that he asks, and that is, since Adam Kadmon is already part of the creation, it's called Adam Debriya, it's the beginning of creation. Yes, it's true, it's the first step, it's like the blueprint of all of existence. So how could you call it an interface? It is the beginning of creation. It doesn't have any commonality with the divine. That's the question at the bottom of page 328. So what we discussed earlier, that Eir is a mamutza, that's not a question. Because Eir has no substance of its own. Energy and light, all it is a reflector and expressor of a source. So therefore we discussed that in Eir there's two types of Eir, there's Eir HaBli and there's Eir HaGvul. Therefore there's commonality, it's basically two divine energies. So as far as energy goes, that's not an issue in energy. But Ak is a world. You're dealing now with structure. And structure and beyond structure don't have anything in common. Being that, so therefore it's being a structured world, in other words, containers, that's the question on the table. So in other words, think of it like this. An artist, the same classic example I keep using, an artist wants to paint a particular piece of art that's very shaped and defined in a particular way. We'll call it the art of the 10 spheres. Now, as we discussed, the artist in his mind has infinite possibilities. Remember, it's an infinite artist, cosmic artist. So he has infinite possibilities. He can create millions and beyond number type of piece of art. But in his infinite possibilities, he's chosen one. So now we're still talking now, we're in the psyche and the spirit of the artist, okay? So what do you have? You have two energies. One is the artist's energy to be able to do any type of art he likes. And being that it's an infinite artist, it can be infinite possibilities. That's a track of so-called a field of energy. The artist's energy to create art. to shape art. And then there's, within those infinite possibilities, as we learn Shir Atzmei, he envisioned, he allocated, he estimated, I want one piece of art that's going to look like this. It's going to look like Chachma, Bina, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chayid, Yesod, Malchus. That is called the Sheirish Ha'eris, the root of the energies, and this is called the 10 hidden spheres. And according to the opinion, the second opinion I mentioned before, there's actually in the energy, in the envisioning, there's actually Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. Compared to the actual piece of art, where the actual Chesed is going to take on shape, it's still amorphous. And without Kalim, it's not going to become art that we can relate to. But from the divine, it's already moved into the realm of a particular vision. But it's still vision. If everything stops right here, you still don't have existence. Now again, this doesn't mean God can't do it. He can do anything he likes. He doesn't even need all this to do it. He doesn't need to envision. He's not an artist. He doesn't have all these limits. He created the rules. So there's no rules. But he wants to have stepping stones. If he doesn't give us these steps, we'll never be able to relate to the artist as he moved from the infinite possibilities to the finite possibilities. You see why that's so critical? So he chose to do it in a way that logic, I would say even better, he chose logic. The way the world exists right now, he chose such a logical system and chose to do it in this type of logical system, which gives us the ability to understand it and relate to it. And we can find examples. We can find examples in our own personal lives, which I'm doing the whole time right here. And that's full of chassidus. Is Mipsari, and for my flesh I behold God. Okay, so we have so far So we have Habligvul and Hagvul. What we don't have is a piece of art. We only have a vision. It's a vision of 10 spheres, but it's still a vision. Then comes the next thing, Sheirish HaKelim. Now we're dealing with an instrument, paint, a canvas. Not to complicate matters, let's just call it all the instruments. All the kelim necessary to create this piece of art. Now the kelim are completely antithetical to the energy. The energy is an expression of the artist. Even the 10 spheres is still the artist's vision. And in it lays, and it contains within it all the infinite possibilities, like we learned, in a concealed way. There's a reshim still there, there's an impression. In other words, if you dig deep enough in the 10 spheres, you're going to find that this artist can do a lot more. But now you're dealing with another side. God wants a world that is not aware of all these possibilities, or else it wouldn't be able to exist. He wants tachtenim. He wants a world that has to have structure, and a structure that ultimately, after everything, is going to be able to sense that it's an independent entity. So here comes a bunch of steps here. So number one comes the desire for kelim. So this is the Sheirish HaKelim now. This will be called the Asius HaReshimu. It's also there. It's Asius. Remember I said letters? The artist, as he envisions the piece of art, he's also envisioning how he's going to express it through letters. Think of it like this. Right before I spoke, I think what I'm saying. Or right before you write, you think what you're writing. But the thought is still how the Asius are still part of your thought process. So the number one is there's Asius now. There's letters. In the case of the artist, there's instruments. Think of it, of actual instruments. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. Now the energy of Chesed is going to enter the instrument of Chesed. But they are different components. We're dissecting it. This is, what I'm saying now is crucial to the whole picture. But there's one problem still. All's fine and good. Okay. We have energy, we have containers and instruments. But how does this play itself out? Well, as long as it's still in the artist's consciousness, doesn't matter. Because in God's consciousness, Kelim, Eris, it's all one part of one vision, and one part of an artist wants something. So how does it make sense in a logical way that this process manifests? So here we have the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is a critical component. The Tzimtzum, what it does is, it conceals. It's also God's power, for the record, by the way. It's also God's power. So we have God's energy, infinite energy, we have God's finite energy, we have God's Kelim, and now we have God's Tzimtzum, which relates to the Kelim, by the way. But it's not just he wants Kelim, its Tzimtzum now is that it actually conceals all of it. Because if the artist's energy would just be flowing, it would just overwhelm. The ability to go and say, let's make one stroke, one color, requires a very super divine effort to conceal the rest of it. That's why it says Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum fills the entire, it's called incompetence. Omnipresence of the divine fills it all. There's no way. It's like the artist's brilliant mind, and all his vision is all over the place. The Tzimtzum plays the role of actually withholding that it should not be revealed. It still remains there. But now, the artist is able to create a reality where you could see him going step by step, and here goes one stroke, another stroke, and an outsider standing there, which is also part of the creation. We do not see everything behind the curtain. We don't see the whole thing, how it got to here. All we see is the step-by-step process. Basar Mamoris Nivra Elam. Vayomer Lakim Yehi Vayhi. Day 1. The next day, Vayomer Lakim, the Havdil Ben Rakia, day 2. Third day, Desha, Tetzi Daretz Desha, vegetation. Day 4, the luminaries. Day 5, the animals. And day 6, the human being. Very distinct. From the perspective from below, each of these creatures, they only see what they have to see, their little part. But it's all coming from an artist that is concealed, basically. And then, of course, is the ultimate concealment, that he doesn't even let you see that he created this piece of art. You don't even see the God that's inside this instrument, unless you deduce it and come to understand it. Let me just finish 1 second, then we'll have plenty more to say to understand this chapter well. So Tzimtzum plays the key role of, it's almost like the final aspect of the equation, to allow this to start taking place. And again, not because God needs it. It's because existence cannot be the way it is right now, and would not be understandable if it was not through such a process. And that's what he wants. He wants it to be understandable. So we should be able to retrace it and steps and be able to reconnect. Now, I know you have a question, so I'll take the question, but then I'll want to continue about the Tzimtzum thing. And this is also a critical component of the Chiddush of the Arizal, as opposed to the other Kabbalists.
So, I may have heard you wrong, but I thought you said that the desire for creation is what we're calling the oisius of Rishima.
I wasn't emphasizing so much Nesava, Kodesh Baruch Hu.
Which would imply that the Rishima came before the Tzimtzum, which came settle in my mind.
Rishima means impression. So Rishima is an impression from before the Tzimtzum, of the Aces that are before the Tzimtzum. So it goes like this. The 10 hidden spheres, the 10 energies that I mentioned, have potential containers. But before the Tzimtzum, it's like the letters are completely submerged in the energy. When the energy is removed, think of it like an ocean. It's all in there. And you move the ocean, then suddenly you see an impression is left.
So those letters do exist before the Tzimtzum?
Yes, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, and not only that, it says the Rebbe Marash as a Chiddush that Esis HaRishima Lei Noga B'hem HaTzimtzum. The Tzimtzum actually didn't even affect the letters. All it did was take away, removed. But the letters are exactly this way they were before the Tzimtzum. Think of the letters as being the so-called the forms of expression of the energy of the artists. That's the spheres. But the word Rishima is correct. Only after Tzimtzum can you say Rishima. Rishima means impression. Think of it like this. Think of it like this, okay? You have a projector of infinite light, white light. That is the infinite possibilities of the artist. Then you have in that infinite light he chooses, he wants to have a finite light of Chesed Gvur Tiferet. Okay, but he wants it to manifest. So then he has a film. I'm using another mashal, the same idea. The film is like the instruments, a film. Listening? Listen to this. So now the projector of infinite light and finite light is through the film. But there, the light is so intense that all you still see is only white light. Now what happens is he closes the projector, so to speak. So the light is no longer shining. But you have a film, but you can't see anything. The film is just an impression of what was there before, but now you have the film. And if you now illuminate very small light, like a kav, then you start seeing actual images start emerging. And also that is not immediate. First the Kalim are very, very sublime, then there's 10 energies in one container, then there's 10 energies in 10 containers, and there's shattering, and then there's Tikkun, where they finally come together. But the vision, I'm specifically giving a visual for it because you can understand it. Remember, because the light is so intense, and it has to be this way, because any radical jump that's too much will cause a problem, because we won't be able to retrace the steps. You understand? You need to have the interface as much as possible. So that's why the light gets diminished slowly. Shtalshlus, that's called Hishtalshlus. That's why it's called Hishtalshlus. It's evolution. It's step by step. A little more diminishing, container emerges. Until in Atzilus you have the perfect film and the perfect light balance, but it's alakus. Then happens next is the light starts getting more diminished and the kalim start becoming more powerful, to the point where now all we have is kalim and we barely can see the light. That's the tachtenim she'en tacht lamatim. What does he say in Tanya? The tachtenim that you don't see any gili air. In Yasir Ruchnis you see some gili. In Yitzir a little more. In Bria more. In Atzilus it's the perfect film. It's like the Ovid's perfect existence. Before Atzilus it's more light and very little container. And until you go all the way to the Kav. So you have here a complete, literally map and stepping stones. How much energy, how much container. And to really relate it, frankly, the best way is to map it out in your own personal life. You have this whole set of shtalshlus going on right now. For example, when you're in the highest moments of inspiration, let's say, whatever it may be, if I bring in Yom Kippur, Pesach, Shavuos, doesn't matter, family, Simcha, your light and containers are both alive. When you're at your darkest place, so the shells, the klippas, dominate and the energy is almost gone. As you feel drained, you feel lost, you feel confused, you feel down, demoralized. So you literally can map out in human moods and human condition the stages. Obviously, each one of us, we're not neshamas of Atzilus, but in the microcosm, relative to us, we have chumris, gashmis, ruchnius, air, higher air. It can go all the way up to the tzimtzum, to lifnei tzimtzum. A person who's a real ovid is working on that. When we daven, we're going through 4 rungs, we're going through 4 worlds in every journey. If you're really thinking about, if this was done right, we would map this out. Each one of us would have literal tools that you can go away with today and tomorrow, and use this literally of how to grow in your life. Why it's so powerful, even when I say it, is because we're not taught to do that. We learn it. And esoterically we understand these are levels and it's important. But you really want to get this, map it out in your life. And trust me, you'll understand Ayin Beis like you never did. Because it'll play itself out. And then you can find out, if you have a problem, you go say, okay, where is the Ayin Beis address it?
So it sounds like a new yeshiva curriculum.
100%. To me, this is the way you're supposed to know Chassidus. This is the way you're supposed to know Chassidus. I don't think there's any other way, frankly. How you explain it, good. We all can have different explanations, but that it's a blueprint for your, basically for your. Remember, you are a microcosm of Kol Seder Shtalshlus. Esa'elam Nasim Belibam. We are a microcosm of all of existence. Selam Elokim. From my flesh I behold God, and that's where it comes out. That is the most exciting part, is to map it out in your personal life. Then you're talking real business. But now every part has to be addressed. Now, the challenge here, the interface of Eris and Kalim, I'm not going to say relatively is easier, but we address that. There, you're really talking about how energy meets containers. For example, how would that plan itself out? Let's say, here's an example. When you teach, I'll use an example as a teacher or as a speaker or as a writer. You have to have the perfect balance between the words and the ideas. If it's too wordy, too many Kalim, you can lose the message. Too few kalim, you could also lose it. You need perfect balance. The right words that fit exactly the idea that you want to convey. A master teacher will have perfect eris and kalim. Someone who's not a great teacher and is betrained, you could say, okay, you know what, your kalim are a little too callous or something, or coarse, and they need to be refined. You find people who have great energies, but they don't have good kalim. The ideas are great, and they're brilliant, but they don't know how to express it. They overwhelm others, or they overwhelm themselves. So you could have a literal model in all of this. Now, but here is now the key thing. So the balance of Eretz and Kelim we discussed. And I don't want to go back there right now. That deserves its discussion. But where we are right now comes the challenge is what happens. Okay, Eretz and Kelim, fine. We found the balance. We found the formula. But there's some key things that still need to be established regarding the relationship with the divine. And here is the key chiddush of the Arizal. And this is it's mind-blowingly eloquent, I have to tell you, when you think about it. So there's the expression that he's going to use here. We'll learn it inside again because this is a very fundamental chapter. The expression comes, I found it the first time from the Tzemach Tzedek in his gloss and his commentary on the Alter Rebbe's Maimer of Tov Kuf, I think Samach Zayin, I believe. The expression goes like this: Ramak la yoda me'inyan hatzimtzum. It's a very strong statement. The Ramak did not know of the inyan of tzimtzum. Now the Ramak is Ramoshe Korovero, the author of the Pardes, one of the greatest works of Kabbalah. He was the greatest Kabbalist till the Arizal. The interesting thing is he met the Arizal. He was living in Sfas. He was older. When he met the Arizal, he recognized who the Arizal is. He saw him as his teacher. The Rebbe brings that when the Ramak passed away, the Arizal was maspid him. Famous in Pasha Kiseitze, for Salisa ala Eitz. There's a whole sikha explaining the hesped of the Arizal on the Ramak. So we're talking about two giants on every possible level. The Ramak's Pardes is quoted in Chassidus thousands of times, in Tanya hundreds of times. So we're not talking here about the Arizal as opposed to Ramak. It's just two great Kabbalists. But the expression Ramak li'yodam inyan hatzimtzum, which is a very fascinating expression, and like I said, it's expression clearly from the Alter Rebbe himself. I found that Tzemach Tzedek writes it, and the Rebbe Rashab in this chapter explains it. But he really uses the words from the Tzemach Tzedek, so you have to really study it inside to get it well. What is the tzimtzum, the chiddush of the Arizal and tzimtzum, and how did the Ramak and the Mekubalim before him understand? Like what dilemma does it resolve? This is the big question. So the simple explanation of what the tzimtzum resolves is the radical jump from divine consciousness to, let's call it, existential consciousness, our consciousness. Because here's a big dilemma. Again, we could always say Kol Yachol, God can do anything. But we want to avoid Kol Yachol wherever we can. Because if you rely on that, it does not help us get anywhere. Someone says to you, God can do anything, how does that help us reach it? Then it's up to God. So we try to explain as much as possible without Kol Yachol, without this, everything is possible. And remember, God has no paradoxes, there's no logic, there's no rules, anything goes. So the tzimtzum comes to resolve, and actually there's a beautiful word in the Tzemach Tzedek and the Rebbe Rashab, that without the tzimtzum allows us to be metzayer and seichel. That's not my words; those are the words from the Rabbeim. It allows us to understand with our understanding a critical question, and not rely on just saying we don't understand it. And that's the question is like this: the divine consciousness is reality. Achdus Hashem. We say, what does that mean in simple English? It means the reality of the divine is reality. Anything that's going to now emerge is going to be a superimposed reality. Good, God wants it, He wants Tachtenim, He wants a world, He wants us, and so on. But you can't say that's a novelty. That's a chiddush. That's called Yesh Ma'ayin. Why do we call Yesh Ma'ayin? People say, Yesh Ma'ayin doesn't mean something from nothing. There was no nothing. God is not nothing. So it means that what was created is not similar to what was there before. When you talk about cause and effect, so here's water is here, and then water flows here, so it's maybe diminished water, but it's still the same thing. Yesh Ma'ayin means it's no longer water. How did divine energy become matter? Keich Atzmos. Energy doesn't become matter. Now we say E equals MC squared, because after God created existence, matter and energy are interchangeable. But it wasn't that way, it didn't have to be that way. Divine energy, as much as divine energy, sunlight can flow and flow and flow. It'll never create a plant. It'll nurture a plant, but it will not create an animal. It's light, it's energy. So how does energy create matter? That's Keich Atzmos. That's not the question here, how it happened. The question is, how does the divine consciousness disappear? What are you doing with it? What happens to it? What happens to the divine revelation? Or to put it in the Moshel Chassidus Yud Alter Rebbe's famous Moshel. A teacher is with infinite wisdom. or the artist I was mentioning before. His wisdom is now shining all over. Now comes a student. If this teacher just will reveal everything without any constriction, constraints, contraction, and limits, the student cannot receive it. Impossible. Will be overwhelmed, confused, and so on. So the Tzimtzum answers that question, that the consciousness is concealed. It's withdrawn, only concealed, not fundamentally disappears, concealed, in order for the student to be able to hear Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. Okay. That's what the Tzimtzum does. The Tzimtzum is the quantum leap. To put it a little more specifically, you may have heard the expression Elokuz b'pashitus, Elemis b'eschatzus. It means that in reality, godliness was pashut. That was the plain given reality. And Elemis was a chiddush. Now God wants something that doesn't look like Him, that conceals His presence, an agnostic universe, a individual identity. Even chesed. You can't call chesed God. Chesed is one expression of the divine. So clearly you're talking here about some type of bria. Tzemach Tzedek actually brings some place where he says that the Alter Rebbe sometimes even called air bria. Sometimes he doesn't call air bria. But in one way, air is bria because anything that's not atzmus is not only atzmus is natural, is the natural divine reality. So what's reality? Reality is the divine, and Elemis is b'schatzus. But God wants to suddenly reverse it, and wants Elemis to be b'pshitus. By us down here, what's b'pashit? Pashit is that there's a table and there's a chair and there's money and there's fights and there's everything that this petty world is consumed with. And you tell me about God, yeah, I believe it. It's there. It's somewhere, but it's definitely not pshitus. It's chiddush. Chiddush of God. Okay, that's a chiddush. Even though logically we can understand the other way around, but bottom line, in our hergish, in our feeling, the Rebbe once wrote in one of the sikhs, I remember preparing, the Rebbe wrote, "B'hergish haseinu." The Gashmis is first. Elam is b'pshitis. Even if Seichel says the opposite, Eneid Mulvade, but in Hergish for sure it's that way. All you got to do is remember what you feel when you wake up, or throughout the day. I'm not even getting to whether you're a particularly narcissistic or selfish, self-absorbed person. Even if you're just a regular guy without even focusing on yourself, Elam has is Pashat. And Elokus is you have to search. The truth is, okay, I mean, you know the classic story with a chassid, the misnagid, or a philosopher, a rabbi, however you want to use it, where they discussed whether God exists or doesn't exist. They're debating the issue, and they're going nowhere, of course. And finally, the chassid says, "You know what? I envy you, because you think, you think about God all the time. Frankly, I think about myself all the time." And with that, they parted ways. And this guy thought, "Oh wow, there's great chassids complimenting me. I think about God, and he thinks about himself." Until someone made him aware, or however the story goes, years later, or he got wiser, or maybe he never got wiser, that there was really an insult. The chassid was telling him, "You think about God all the time because you know you exist. Your question is, does God exist? Maybe he exists. How does he exist?" But the chassid doesn't think about himself all the time because he knows God exists. That's not a question. So what are you thinking about himself? It's not just cliche. It's a different approach. And the same thing, like if God had to destroy the universe, what would he do? So the Baal Halacha is going to learn Chumash and learn this. As the first thing, he'll bring a mabel, destroy all the animal creatures, and then he'll take a fire and burn it all up, and then scatter the ashes. And Al Pi Halacha, burning is like considered bittul and so on, all the dinim with Hilchos Chametz, etc. And the person who's learned Chassidus will tell you one word: if God didn't want existence, he'd do nothing. He would do nothing. He'd stop wanting, stop breathing, stop willing, stop speaking, and it's gone. So the question then, now to crystallize the question, how? So how does that become this? This is like really, this is not a small shift. This is like taking, the hand was inside the glove, everyone is aware of that. And now suddenly you think the glove is the hand and the hand is the glove. How does such it basically turned existence inside out. Elikus was pshittus and Elemis is chiddush. And now Elemis is pshittus and Neskus is chiddush. So this is a fundamental paradigm shift. Complete reverse. And it's not an illusion. So you could say, if it's an illusion, then you know what? We're imagining things. It really Elikus is Pshita, but it's not an illusion, or else the whole purpose of existence would mean nothing if it's an illusion. So there, the Chiddush of that Rizal, Tzimtzum. Now, I should tell you that the Rizal is Machadish. It doesn't mean it's not hinted to in the Zohar and so on, like anything in Torah.
It doesn't mean that the Ramak didn't speak about Tzimtzum.
Both, for sure. He didn't speak, that's for sure. Lo Yoda, even more than he didn't speak. He didn't know.
He didn't have the word Tzimtzum.
The Tzimtzum doesn't exist in his lexicon.
In the Zohar?
No, also not. I'm saying, like many things, once you know it from the Rizal, you find in Zohar, there's an expression, for example, in Zohar, Bereish Manisa de Malka, the beginning when God arose, in the beginning of the Melech's will, arose in his will, Galav Galif B'tir Elah, he engraved something in the higher light, and then there's a mention of lamp of darkness. Now, when you know Bereish is Bar Elokim is Tzimtzum. And Vayihi Eir is the Kav. But that's only after the Arizal.
Tzimtzum is Pshitus.
Right.
No, I don't know if you want to go here or not. So how do they then explain?
I'm going there. I'm absolutely no. I'm not just going. This is exactly what he talks about.
Okay.
1 second. Hold on. So what we have here, this is what I'm discussing now is from the most basic, profound and fundamental concepts of Chassidus Chabad, basically. So the Arizal comes and explains that Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is what? The same God that has the power to reveal has the power to conceal. Hein Gvureisov, and that's also his kayach. Shayich Adamuna at length. Tzimtzum, Elokim. The Tzimtzum is a concealer. It's also divine power, but it conceals and allows for independent consciousness to emerge, which will ultimately be us. That's what the Tzimtzum resolves. There are many other things that Tzimtzum resolve, but this main thing. But it goes even deeper. Before I get to deeper, so how did they learn before the Arizal? So he says here, they understood existence as ilav olol. Everything is cause and effect. They don't have a radical leap, a radical jump. 1 second. However, what is that? But Chaz v'Shalom to say that the Ramak and others, you can't compare them, God forbid, to those people who said, Ozav Hashem Hashemayim, that God left the earth down for us and left it and remains in heaven. They also understood that God is infinitely distant. But this is the key thing. But that's what he says, L'tzayir b'seichel. By them it was Amunah. There was no way to explain it. Without Tzimtzum, they had no explanation for it. They just had to relegate God into another reality, and that's that. And our relationship with God, this is key now. This is the deeper point. Our relationship with God, therefore, goes to the God that relates to us. But to the God that doesn't relate to us, to that Elikus B'Pshitas, we simply believe it and we have no connection to it. We will never relate to it. By the Arizal revealing Tzimtzum, he's showing us in our Seichel that we can actually that God's Eshalei Be'erech of God relates to us. We can relate to it. With Tzimtzum, we can relate to it. So we have now in our philosophical explanation, we can understand how God is infinitely distant. With the Ramak and the other Mukabalim, their understanding of God has to be a God that's commensurate to us, that has some hishtavus. Very distant, but still, ultimately, there's some type of illavol because they don't have the concept of a radical jump, a quantum leap. So the leap by them is Amunah. Fine, you can jump and say it's Amunah, but you cannot relate it with any intelligence. Tzimtzum, paradoxically, because the Arizal talks about Tzimtzum, Tzimtzum allows us in our existence to relate to something that's infinitely distant, that's so infinitely distant that everything is equal compared to that level of godliness. And what means relate to it means we can climb there and ultimately connect even to that Shalei B'Erech.
So how do they explain Gashmius out of the Lakus?
Well, Gashmius Alakus, the Arizal also, the Tzimtzum doesn't resolve Gashmius.
Well, but at least gives you the notion that there is this quantum leap between incomparable realities.
No. The existence of Gashmius, everyone comes to the same place. The Alter Rebbe's Chiddush of Atzmus.
It's like we're so simple.
No, but how do you get from Tzimtzum to Gashmius?
Because there's a quantum leap.
No, quantum leap doesn't turn air into Gashmius. A quantum leap changes our consciousness. But how do you get a yesh? How do you get a yesh Gashmi? A physical thing that's not, God is not physical. How do you get a physical thing? That's what you're talking about, right? Tzimtzum doesn't create physical. Tzimtzum all it does is change, completely alters our paradigm, but it does not create. Gashmis comes only from Atzmos. I mentioned that before. Tzimtzum does not resolve the issue of Gashmis. Tzimtzum, let's put it this way, if there was no Tzimtzum, you could have a Yesh, but the Yesh would know there's a God. But there would be a Yesh. A Yesh means a tangible matter, substance. That's what...
Here's what I'm stuck. To me, is in the mushroom. No matter how much you condense the water, it's still water.
And from that result, oyer, even if you have a tzimtzum, as much as you condense it, does not create a yesh either. Yesh requires a different thing altogether.
They have no problem getting to yesh.
No, just whatever the Arizal will say, they'll say. That's not an issue. That too, there are places how you explain that, but the issue we're talking about is, that's why I want to bring up one important thing here. You could argue, why can't you argue that Atzmos, what does he need to have divine consciousness for? Why didn't he just create, why do you need a reality of Elokus B'Pshitus? And then have to change it to Elamus B'Pshitus? Just jump from Atzmos to Elamus B'Pshitus. Now I think you'd understand the reason. Because if you jump, you have no way back. Understand? So you want to know this, like for example, we relate to the Yesh first, to the Gashmis first, Olam is first, but we know in our minds that's not the way it's meant to be. So therefore, Atzmus Taka can jump straight into Yesh and can jump and just through a Tzimtzum and so on. But then you don't have uncompromised So you need to have a state where there's a complete, that all of existence is on a conscious state aware of God. To put it in other terms, Atzmos is built in Metzias Nimtza. You know the expression. A non-existential existence. Meaning, you can't call him he exists, but you can't say he doesn't exist. You basically say he does not exist. But he does not exist like anything we understand or relate to. That Atzmos is inaccessible. That built in Metzias Nimtza manifested in Metzias Nimtza. So Atzmos, as he's completely beyond, manifested in an energy that is consciousness, but is divine consciousness and is complete Elokus B'Pshitus. And that's a necessary state. For an example would be, imagine we would be born into this world without going through 9 months in the mother's womb and without education, and we pop out, we're 20 years old. Like Adam and Chava. Okay, what's the problem? You never tasted purity. You'd be thrown right into a world. It would be a world after the Tzimtzum. You never would have had the immersion, first of all, learning the whole Torah in your mother's womb, the immersion of being surrounded by the embryonic fluids, like the world was surrounded by water. So you have to begin completely immersed in a higher reality. Then, slowly, you prepare. Then it reverses. As you're born, you forget about the Kol HaTorah Kula, and now you're the material world. And that too is slowly and gradual, so by the time you're an adult, it would be too much of a shock if we were thrust into it. Even as it is, it's pretty shock. You know, the Mittler Rebbe writes, one of the reasons the child cries when leaving the mother's womb, because it's going from Elokus B'Pshitus to Elamus B'Pshitus. And there's a lot to cry about. It sees both worlds. It sees a reality that it's going to forget. And it's going to a reality that it doesn't want to remember. You know? So there's only once that door opens. Twice, actually. On the way back. When the door opens again. So the point is, so you need divine consciousness, but divine consciousness now has the other paradox. As long as it's there, as long as you're in your mother's womb, as long as you're surrounded by the whole thing, by the air, you don't have any independent consciousness. So Tzimtzum comes and creates independent consciousness. Now remember, consciousness is air, not yesh. So two things, to answer your question, two things are necessary for Tachtenim to exist. One is Kayach Atzmus, to create a yesh, like he says in Tanya, yesh that feels that it has no source because it comes from Atzmus that has no source. And the second thing, you need a dynamic of concealing the energy and the consciousness, that we should have a yesh consciousness and not an air consciousness, not a divine consciousness. They're not the same thing, what I just said. You could have, for example, a yesh and should have divine consciousness. You could have divine consciousness and not have yesh. For example, Atzilus. Atzilus is not a yesh. There's no yesh agashmi in Atzilus. Atzilus is ruchnistic energy. It's divine consciousness. There's no yesh there, even though it's after the Tzimtzum. But it's a divine consciousness that knows the divine is there, but it knows it exists. It's not the way it's lifnei for the tzimtzum. This is, look, I'll tell you the truth. If this is the first time you're hearing this stuff like this or elaborate like this, trust me, this is going to take a lot of thinking again and again. It's not simple stuff. This takes a lot of assimilation to make it yours. And thank God it's recorded. I'm happy to go over it again and again. We're talking very, very fundamental, and it's a lot of elements here. It's the dynamics of existence. But the interesting irony here is that the Arizal, through a radical leap, gives us a more closer relationship with Elokus than the Ramak without a radical leap. Because the Ramak has to rely that Elokus has to be relegated to a place we can't relate to. That Elokus, that's Shalei Berach. And Tzimtzum, strangely, actually gives us a bridge, because the Tzimtzum, so-called, balances that part of the equation of the Ein Arich. It accounts for the Ein Arich part.
A bridge between...
It'd be something like this. It would be like you're standing in the presence of the Rebbe. Two people. So one person thinks, okay, no, the Rebbe is a lot greater than me, but I'm smart and he's smart. He's smarter than I am. I'm holy, he's even holier. Then comes a real chassid who realizes the Rebbe is completely shalei be'erach to me. So the first one is having a relationship, but his relationship is with the Rebbe as he's relative. That part of him that's shalei be'erach, you don't even know he's shalei be'erach, so you don't account for it. So basically, someone tells you later, you know what, the Rebbe you just met, he's not completely not in your realm. He says, really? So the chassid that's aware of it makes him have a relationship with it, because the awareness brings an awe, a yira, and a recognition of the atzmus, the haflah, the grandeur of atzmus.
But it's not a bridge between. This is the Kiddush for me. It's not a bridge between Yesh and I.
Right.
No.
Yesh ma'ayin.
Bridge between what?
Between the Ein Arich, the bli gvul of Elokus, that's the Elokus b'pshitus, and a world of Elam is b'pshitus, the bridge of those two consciousness. It's in other ages, the bridge between gvul and Ein HaBli Gvul, in its pure form, in its purest form. Well, to put it down, the issues that he says in this chapter, that goes like this: Keser. The Ramak asks the question whether Keser is Ein Sof. There are Kabbalim that say Keser is Ein Sof, and the Kabbalim that he comes to the opinion Keser is not Ein Sof, because Ein Sof, because Keser, at the end of the day, has a relationship with existence. So he says that Keser is not Ein Sof. Nevertheless, as we're going to learn inside again, nevertheless, he puts it this way: Keser is the first olul from the ilah, is the first effect from the cause, from the first cause. So even though it's not Ein Sof, it comes from Ein Sof, it's created from Ein Sof, and he says at the same time that the distance from the levels under Keser to Keser, from Asiyah to Keser, is closer than Keser to Ein Sof.
Yeah, that's it. That's us.
Yeah. So that's the Ramak.
We said similar things.
No. 1 second. Listen till then. No, 1 second. But then he says, but at the end of the day, it's true. No, it's from Asiyah to Keser is closer than from Keser to Ein Sof.
Right.
But from Keser, but does that mean that Keser and Asiyah are equal to Gabe Ein Sof? No. He says that, so even though Keser to Asiyah is closer than Keser to Ein Sof, but Asiyah is still farther from Ein Sof than Keser is. So there's some similarity that Keser has to Ein Sof that we don't have, which means that it's not total Ein Arich. Because real Ein Arich would be that in one compared to a trillion is completely equal compared to Bli Gvul, infinite. 1 to a trillion. A trillion is not closer to infinite. So to say that 1 to a trillion is closer than a trillion to Bli Gvul, but then a trillion to Bli Gvul is equal than 1 to Bli Gvul. So 1 to a trillion, mamash equal. But what happens if you said 1 to a trillion is closer than trillion to Bli Gvul, but a trillion to Bli Gvul is closer than 1 to a trillion?
The second part. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. No, closer than 1 to Bli Gvul. Then you have to say that you're not talking about Bli Gvul Amiti. You're talking about a divine that's already somewhat in the realm of
So that's the Ramak.
That's the Ramak. The Arizal will say that Keser Well, we'll soon get to another part of that. The Rizal will say like this. No. They're both equal mamish. Keser and Asiya are literally equal compared to Ein Sof. So how did it happen then? The Tzimtzum takes care of that. So the Tzimtzum basically concealed that whole Bli Gvul, so it allows the rest of it to emerge. Without Tzimtzum, you have to use cause and effect, so you could say it's very distant and almost completely distant, but there's something remains, that something of the divine remains relative. And the part of the divine that's not relative is something we cannot relate to.
So
That's the key line that I'm adding here.
Let me say so. So clearly in the Rizal, part something of the divine, everything of the divine is ingested in the material, but there's no relative. That's the quantum leap. You know what I'm saying? That for according to the thinking of the Rizal, for the divine to merge with the.
But before merging, let's talk about the Tzimtzum to make
It
to.
has to be a tzimtzum because there is no relationship. It's a quantum leap. Is that a true thing to say?
Yes. Yeah. No, but you have to. But there's another point you must add, which I'm adding right now. How does the Ramak understand it? That's the question. So saying he's understanding it, that part that the Arizal has now added into the equation, the Ramak has to relegate to faith, and we have no connection to that. We can't talk about it. Existence has no relationship with that. The Tzimtzum, remember, is a reality in existence that gives us the capacity to recognize Ein Harech. And according to the Ramak, you cannot really appreciate Ein Harech of Elikus, the real Ein Harech. You can only appreciate relative Ein Harech, relative infinity, not absolute infinity, because he has no way to account for it. There's nothing to. There's nothing. How do we relate to it? There's nothing. It's just completely. It's very subtle, but I'll just tell you the few things. What I'm taking this from is explanation of this is actually in Hatamim. There's a discussion on this by the Chassidim. Chatzar Fegan was the volume 2, page 88. If you want to look it up,
volume 2,
page 88. So in Hatamim, you'll probably get more confused when you read it, but okay. But there's one more thing we must now throw into the picture, which is going to complicate matters. So you think, so what does the Arizal do with Keser? That's the question now. For the Ramak, Keser is a reminder of the relative infinity of Ein Sof. What about the Arizal? Keser is completely equal to Asiyah. So what is it? What role does it play? So he says here everything turns upside down. According to the Arizal, Keser is actually Bli Gvul as it manifests in existence. So Keser is not a creation of Ein Sof, he says, not Mishava from Ein Sof. Keser is the Tachteina Shebemaitzel. Basically, it's how the infinite energy envisioned the finite. That's what Keser is. So therefore, Keser suddenly becomes, in the Arizal, because of the Tzimtzum, he's able to empower a force after the Tzimtzum with something that reminds us mamish of Bli Gvul, which the Ramak cannot do. Did you get that?
How do these two things go together? On one hand, it's like a seed, and on the other hand, it's able to do what you do.
So here, I'm going to use words here. Here. The Das Arizal be'inyan HaKeser hu she'HaKeser Ein Sof ve'eina Ein Sof. 10 lines from the bottom. Actually, 3, 4, 7, 11 lines from the bottom of page Shin Chavtes. I'm going to read the whole thing inside. This is very. You see?
You learned this already? This chapter?
We learned it twice already. Not the whole chapter. No. We've been crawling through this very slowly, deliberately. I want to go back. Let's put it this way. I want to explain it again in more palatable terms. We learned it earlier as well. You can have an image. God created a universe we shall say that we can only relate to Mamala Kalam. Okay? What does that mean? Let's be specific. Like the Rambam says, Ketzad Yoveh, how do you come to love and awe of God? You observe the universe. Anyone with a sober mind, without any personal agendas, says, no book can be without an author, no art without an artist, no music without a composer. This universe, more beautiful, more elegant, more designed than any book, music, or art. Unbelievable. What kind of artist must have made this? The synchronicity of nature. Your own body. Study your body. Study how we breathe. The mechanisms. The health. It's just mind-boggling. So you can come. So you come to a clear understanding. You can understand, basically, as we say Yom Kippur in the prayer, right? That the potter in the clay. You look at the clay, you see the potter. You look at and what we know about God, I'm not getting into how deep you go, but you definitely see a brilliant mind, and more brilliant than all of us. And whatever we've ever created has been created. Everything, every technology. A camera is copying an eye. An airplane is copying a bird. There's no technology that's not copying. All of art is copying nature, basically. So what do we got from this? We get to this, a knowledge of a godliness that manifests in existence. This would be Mamala Kalam at its best. And it's a high place to reach. You see Koyach HaPoel B'Nifel. And you can study any part of nature, you could study and understand another dimension of God's wisdom. You see, when we see these nature shows, you see, unbelievable. In this creature you see this type of harmony. In this creature you see this balance. It's mind-blowing. Okay. But then comes this God also invested in existence, Seviv Kalam. Now, Seviv Kalam does not manifest in any particular. It's not Eres and Kalim. Seviv Kalam is Ratzon. So when you study the eye, you're studying Mamala Kalam, Eres Pnim. This is what I'm saying is Ayin Beis, hardcore Ayin Beis, what he spoke earlier. Seviv Kalam tells you there's something that's beyond. Whoever made this is not a sum of the parts. What does this elicit? This elicits bittul and awe. This is the core of what we Shavuos Ayin Gimel, which now we're coming to 100 years from then, which we learned several months ago. We're further in. That was the key thing. Seviv Erev Bligvul elicits awe and bittul. Now Erev Mamala Kalam, the question he asks is, doesn't that elicit bittul too? He says yes, it does, but the bittul that elicits is because of the Seviv. Because on its own, it tells you more about existence. But understanding the artist within existence teaches you, yes, that there's a force greater than us. But it doesn't teach us that we're batel b'mitzias. It teaches us, on the contrary, you could actually connect to that God and be more of a mitzias. Because it's telling you that God made this mitzias and He's the soul of it. So in a way you could become even not necessarily a bigger yesh, as in, I'm not talking about yesh as an arrogant, but definitely a bigger mitzias. You know what? Not only am I existent because I was born, there's a God force inside of me, which is why, for example, Spinoza, pantheism, God is nature, nature is God, doesn't listen bittul. On the contrary, it lists that existence is divine, not just human. It's very all powerful. Seviv Kalam, because it's an energy that does not apply itself to the specifics, elicits awe. That's not about you. That's something beyond existence. So this elicits real bittul. The question is, how deep does this all go? And that's where the Ramak and Arizal, and that's why I'm applying it to Avodah now. I don't want to talk now Skol. It'll be far easier to understand, I think. How deep does this all go? So you could argue, that all goes in a form of process of elimination, like the Ramak. Ill, okay. Process of elimination, the effect shows me the cause, another cause, the first cause, the prime cause, the first mover. Right? They call the first cause. What do I know about the first cause? I know that it's not a sum of the parts. I know it's not Mamala Kalam alone. I know there's something beyond. But what do I know? It's all commensurate to my Yidiyas HaShlila. It's a Shlila of my Chiyuv. It's not some type of absolute infinity. It's relative to what I understand. You know what? An artist on earth does this. God does this. He's beyond that too. But the beyond is all commensurate and proportionate to whatever we understand. And we say, it's not what we understand. So according to the Ramak, the farthest you can go, because he has no tzimtzum to deal with it, the farthest you can go is a shalei be'erech of bligvul, but it's not completely. So yes, Ein Sof is farther from Keser than it is from Asiyah, but Keser still has some ishtavus. Existence still, the highest levels of existence, have some similarity with the divine. In Mamala Kalam it has much more similarity because it's completely manifest. Here it's Takaseviv, it's beyond, but it's still, my only tools that I have to talk about it is the tools of my intelligence. And there's no way with our intelligence that you can envision a Shalei Be'erech that's completely beyond, that makes everything equal. Because how could we? That's the point here. The Arizal came as Machadish, how we could be Metzayer and Ar Seichel, something that's completely beyond. Tzimtzum allows us to do that. That if God has the power to conceal himself completely, where there's not one remnant, not one shred, not even a little that's left in Keser, completely remove himself, that teaches you, wow, that God can do that. That it's to say that God creates us, okay, he's a creator. To say that he gives us energy, but that he can hold my hand, he creates my hand, and I don't feel it, to the point, not only don't I feel it, I could use my hand against his will. What kind of God is that? That's a God that's completely, that's Nimnam Nois. The Ramak doesn't have, Ramak will say also God can do anything, but he has nothing to show for it. He doesn't have a tzimtzum to talk about that manifests. He'll just say, God can do anything. But that doesn't tell us anything. The tzimtzum we can talk about, and we understand his dynamics. In other words, God revealed to us that he made a tzimtzum, and the Arizal revealed to us that what God revealed. So the tzimtzum's revelation, ironically, the concealer as a concealer is a revealer of a divine that is completely beyond. And everything after the tzimtzum is equal. Now, you see, so the level of awe that it elicits is going to be far, far deeper. And it's something we can relate to. You see, the level of awe that the Ramak elicits will be an awe, but I have no tools. So basically you have to simply get swallowed up and say, Atzmus is beyond me, and that's it. Here, with Tzimtzum, you have something to talk about. That its concealment creates a relationship, basically. I think I used an example in last class. I'll go back to personal relationships. In the personal relationship between spouses, I'm using that because it's from the most intimate. They become one. You can also have children, whatever, but very, very intense and very deep relationship, the way it's supposed to be. Complete oneness of two individuals. You know what I mean? On the neshama level, on every possible level. Okay, just so it's yet what is the closeness? They become basar echad, they become one flesh, but they don't become one person. As a matter of fact, that's not a healthy thing. They're two separate entities, the different opinions, and they should remain two separate entities. So there's an element we call love in the relationship, which is the closeness. Yishtavus. I have a commonality with my spouse. My spouse has a commonality with me. We can talk about certain things. We share ideas, children, interests. We build a home together. But then there's something that's not Yishtavus. There's a mystique. What's the feminine mystique, the masculine mystique, whatever you want. And the goal is not to master the mystique, to control it. It's to respect it. As a matter of fact, that's what makes the relationship even deeper. That you don't understand everything, and yet there's a respect, and there's a love, and there's an element of, I would call it distance, space. This is basically Ava and Yira as it plays itself out in our relationships. And you don't want control there. You don't want it to be yours. You want it to remain a mystery. Because fundamentally that's the way it should be. So you could say that the mystique is only a matter of relative mystique. As I work in it, I'll figure her out, or she'll figure me out, which we all know doesn't happen. That's a separate point. But you can delude yourself that it'll happen. He's newlywed. We're veterans. The more you know, the less you know. Let's put it. 1 second. But what happens in this crazy this world of acquisition? Everyone wants control. So we think you're controlling love. But the controlling love is like controlling truth. It's controlling God. It's controlling emes. Chaz v'sholom. Pona lo yiro, we learned in the previous chapter. My face you will not see. that happens to be a healthy thing. Because that teaches you, not that it's relative, that there's something fundamentally beyond you. And that too is part of your relationship with you if you understand it. Now, without the tzimtzum, you can convince yourself, you know what, it's not really infinitely distant, it's just a matter of time and so on. Which language here? Quantum mechanics teaches that there's fundamental things that are always a state of probability and you'll never understand them. You'll never be able to measure them. So there's a fundamental state of mystery that the tzimtzum, that's why it's called Seid HaTzimtzum maybe. The mystery of the tzimtzum. You want it to be that way. With the Ramak, the mystery is a mystery of the mystery. You can't even talk about the mystery. It's whatever is before the first cause is completely off the radar. The Arizal, by introducing Tzimtzum, which is a power of the divine, he introduces a secret, the mystique of Elokus, basically. And that allows us to have a relationship, not a relationship by owning it, a relationship by not seeing it. By not seeing, we are able to see. With the Ramak, the most you can do is you can see, process of elimination, get to something that has commonality with us, but the part that's completely beyond, you just will never see. You'll never have a relationship with. By the way, the Ramak has a role to play, because his focus in the Ramak is on the elements that we do have commonality. He doesn't address the Arizal simply adding depth into the Achdus. That's what's going on here. It's almost like, what the Rebbe says about Havdalah, that when you make Havdalah between Shabbos and Chayil, that's what creates unity between Shabbos and Chayil. When there's a separation, let's say, between your windpipe and your food pipe, then there's unity between them. So Havdalah ends up really a force of Achdus. You understand the idea? Because the separation crystallizes their real roles, and then they can unite. If initially you don't have any roles, the whole thing is one big mess. It's like you need Yom Echad, Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi. Why Yom Echad? You don't have Huchbal, you don't have Kitayv, because you need two entities. Then comes the Shlishi. So the question is asked: why do you need to have two verses? We say every day, two verses contradict each other in the third verse to reconcile. Just bring the third verse, because then you don't have diversity. So you need one. You need two, there's a disagreement, then the third comes and says, that's the deeper element. So that's the point. So in other words, why did I mention that? That was an example for...
The Havdalah itself is...
Right, that the Havdalah itself brings unity. The Teferes that happens Yom Shlishi, the Agdus of Yom Shlishi is far deeper than the first one. Because the first one was one-dimensional, one color. You have red and blue. A Havdalah between them, then you can make them one. Harmony within diversity. Yeah, that's another way to put it. I don't know. To me, this is unbelievable stuff.
According to this, the Arizal right now,
it's so eloquent. No, it addresses like the key. It turns, it addresses the issue of the infinite distance in such an unbelievable way.
According to the Arizal, does this Tzimtzum allow us to ultimately know everything we could know about? Is there going to always remain that mystique, that Be'ein Oroch? You said Tzimtzum allows us to approach that or understand it or relate to it, which is something Ramak didn't do. But does it allow us, are we going to ultimately, even according to the Arizal, is there something, I would assume there's something still of Atzmos that is still never be accessible?
Well, it's Ein Sof.
No. First of all, it's a good question. But I'll answer it in two ways. If you're coming from the desire to understand everything, then my answer will be yes. There's things that you'll never understand, because that's what you have to learn. That not everything has to be in your terms. If you're coming from that place, if you're coming from Shleimus HaAtzmos, that he wants the unknowable to be known, then there'll be a joining of the two. You see my distinction? This isn't about us owning it. It's about when you have the bittul that's deep enough, the true bittul, then you start knowing the unknowable. But it's not the way we know things right now. He talked about this in previous chapters. To know that it can only be la'asid loveh. At this stage, he says even the biggest tzaddikim don't have this. He said the highest tzaddikim don't have this. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu, he says, "Upon lo yiro." My back, yeah, but my face you will not see. And l'asad lo he'll be able to see the face. Yeah, but it's because he came to a deeper level of bittul, not because suddenly he earned.
Yes. Okay.
And that okay is not is more than you.
But that eventual, a million years from now, in Lasi Lavo or whatever.
Yeah, but you know what you have to say is
you're
that.
Going to say eventually there's still a panim of Hashem that is never.
But you see something. Remember, Elikuz b'pshitas means that's the way it should be. That you should embrace that. You should say that's great. Because if you start owning everything, then it's back to your terms.
Right.
In other words, we'd be more comfortable with the mystique than we are with what we know. How about that? I know it's not comfortable today. We don't, what happens if you find out one day that the mystique is far better than what you know? What do you mean, right?
So ultimately, the symptom that allows us to relate to this mystique still has a limit to it, meaning that we'll never be. The limit is if you try to understand it, there's a limit. If you don't try to understand it, then there's no limit. But I thought that was the whole idea of tracing our steps back out from Chabad.
But that's why I said to you. That's why I said to you. The seichel you have, you'll understand that mystique, and then new levels of mystique will be revealed. Yeah.
So that's infinite levels of mystique.
Yeah, but without listen, the Ramak and the Arizal are not that infinitely distant. The Ramak, you don't have a tool to get into the mystique of the concealment. But doesn't mean you don't have ability to imagine that the God is beyond. But just the interface with the Arizal brings the stepping stone a little closer to Atzmus than the Ramak does. Let's put it that way. Now that leads us to the second half. That's why the Arizal says Keser is not a cause, is not an effect of the cause. Keser is not nishava, but Keser is actually, he says, Tachteina Shebemaitzel. It's the bli gvul amiti manifesting in some state. So Keser is Ein Sof and not Ein Sof at the same time. The Ramak has to say Keser is not Ein Sof because of this problem. So, and the Arizal can say Keser is Ein Sof, the higher part of Keser, not the lower part. And the higher part of Keser, therefore, is some type of piece of Atzmos, so to speak. That's what he says here. That's where we reached actually when we were learning down below.
It's in your mushal.
Remember this. Just to clarify even further. Bittul is going to be a necessity. There's no way to get there without bittul. Whether bittul means eliminating our containers, that's the point. No, it doesn't mean. That's what this does. So when your seichel understands the tzimtzum, and you can imagine through the tzimtzum, you are now, mystique has become closer to you than you think it has. Instead of just saying, I don't know how it happened, it just popped into existence. So you have something to hold on to, and as a result, your kelim will become more refined, and the bittul will allow you to start understanding things that you would not have understood without it. So that's the key thing that goes on here, Now, all this is, by the way, an introduction, actually, to Ak. What is Ak's role in the interface then? So, in an interesting way, even though he doesn't say it, I would speculate that the tzimtzum now has also become an interface, but like an inverted interface. It would be like till the tzimtzum you climb the stepping stone step by step. Then suddenly you come to a point where you're told, this point, everything turned inside out. So it's almost like you have to, from here on, walk backwards, or something like that. But it's another stepping stone, but it's a stepping stone through tzimtzum instead of through through gili. That's what I would say. Okay, yes. Yes?
In your mashal, are you saying that Keser is like the infinite artist's ability to pick the one? So Keser relates to the infinite artist, but yet it picks one for picture to draw, relates to...
According to the Arizal, yes. Yeah, according to the Arizal, yes. That Keser becomes... the higher level of Keser is like how Habligvul translates into one particular... but it's still part of that infinite reality. I think that's how he tries to explain it. Because that's what it says earlier for sure.
Is that like the quantum, where It's all probable until you make a choice. Especially the place where
The Rebbe wrote that. The first Farbrengen I ever wrote, officially, the Rebbe wrote that in a footnote to me. When Spheres Ein Ketz becomes one, the fact that it could be possibilities, endless possibilities, that's a quantum state.
right.
It's clearly a quantum state.
Is that true?
And that place,
Yeah.
the word quantum, you don't have to use the word quantum, but it's definitely a place where it can go every possible way. It could have been different spheres, more spheres, infinite spheres. Every possibility is there. There's no and then that manifests in one defined. And that defined now contains all the possibilities too, in some concealed way.
Yes.
I mean, that is the language of quantum mechanics.
Absolutely. I will go a step further. Just one second. I will go a step further. The Tzimtzum allows us to talk about Lifnei Tzimtzum. The Ramak has no way to talk Lifnei Ila HaRishena, before the first cause. What did it say? Let's put it bluntly. The Tzimtzum says that there was a state of Elokuz B'Pshitus, and everything was so encompassing that nothing could exist. So you can talk about that now, even though we're extrapolating, but we have language.
So a result.
The Ramak, what you're going to have is, you can go to the first cause, and then what? What do you do then? We can't go anywhere. All we can say is that beyond that, we can't take any spaceship beyond that. Look, remember, Chassidus is endless. These ideas, frankly, if you really internalize it, I guarantee you'll come up with explanations and thoughts because there's a lot to cover here. I have a bunch of questions I haven't addressed in this too, because I'm trying to first cover step one. Let's just get the idea down, but then there's plenty more to talk about. So yes.
I have only ha'oras. There are three different.
With the aleph or with the ayin?
I hope they're both, because I hope they'll relate to other people. But
Okay.
the first one is when you talk about Spinoza and pantheism. I just opened the Sefer. I can't explain to you about it, but I opened the Sefer. Talked about Arba Nichnas Pardes, Rabbi Akiva and his three friends.
Yeah.
So the Kuzari says that what Elisha ben Abuya saw was the Chayas HaKodesh, and he saw that he had the same spiritual consciousness as they did, and he felt that Torah and Mitzvah was only a stepping stone, so he didn't need Torah and Mitzvahs anymore. Which is similar to the Shlili, that he understood
Okay.
the Mamalik. The second one is, which everybody talks about quantum mechanics, but in pure mathematics it's a much closer relationship. There's something called the axiom of choice. The axiom of choice is you want to prove certain theorems in, let's say, infinite dimensional vector spaces. So you have infinite dimensional sets, like say x sub 1, x sub 2, x sub 3, x sub 4 is a vector. So you say we can prove this a value if we assume that there's a value assigned to x1, x sub 2, x sub 3, x sub 4. So everyone has a value assigned to it. And some formulas you can prove only using this. So the question is the fact that there is an axiom that you can decide. Maybe there's some kind of way to populate a vector that has infinite dimensions. And maybe you can say that's too much of a leap of faith, that mathematics is more constructionist, it depends on calculation. How could you assume such a thing? So they tried to relate this axiom to the other axioms of mathematics. And they found out you can have mathematics with it, and you can have mathematics without it. So that the idea of an infinite choice, a choice out of infinite things, is something that is not within mathematics, but it's like beyond mathematics.
I hear you.
And it's called the act, because you can prove that it's independent, just like you can prove, like the Rebbe quotes about geometry. Parallel lines don't meet is a very useful assumption. It helps us to build, bridges and things. But you can also have Lobachevsky geometry, and you can have Riemann geometry where they meet, where the infinite lines always meet someplace, or where they what's the other one? Where they always meet, or they never meet, or they get further and further apart.
In Tafresh Nun Ches, Pasach Eliyahu, the Rebbe Rashab, when he talks about this subject, he adds one thing. I talked about the set of numbers. We really talked about three different scenarios here. Actually, four, you can almost say. One is finite numbers. So 1 to 10 is closer than 10 to 1,000. Okay. But that's a matter of kamus, and it's just a matter of climbing. Then we talk. The second one is that there's 1 to 1,000, or 1 to a trillion is closer than the trillion to Bligvul. But the trillion is closer to Bligvul than the 1 is. So it's not in mathematics, you're not going to find that, but I'm just saying that as an example.
It's really in another dimension, which is an extension of the previous dimension.
In other words, at the end of the day, there is still a
Value relationship.
yeah.
You'll find it. It's just buried in certain places.
Okay. Then comes a state where we're talking about real Bligvul. The 1 and the highest finite number is absolutely equal compared to infinite. Not one. And then he goes further and says in the Tafresh Nuches, but infinite numbers, it's still Bligvul numbers. It's still the world of Bligvul. By saying Bligvul, you mean to say it has a relationship with Gvul. So it doesn't have a relationship as in closeness, but it's still in the same realm called Gvul Bligvul. And then there's something that there's not even Bligvul. You can't even call it Bligvul. Another way to put it, sometimes it's explained like this: that what 1 in a trillion are missing compared to infinite is that they're not infinite. But infinite can't say there's no finite set of numbers. So in other words, their lack is what they're not what they are. But there's a level that doesn't even value what you are. Someone doesn't even consider numbers of value. So finite, infinite, the whole thing means nothing. So even what they are has no value, not only what they're not. Now, okay, so the Ramak would go to level 2, that I said. The Arizal would go to level 3 and further. Basically, that's what Tzimtzum does. It takes into account that so-called. It takes into account the free radical of the Shalei Be'erach.
That's another one. So there's the third thing.
We need to get back to the 60s. Maybe.
I don't know if should we learn this inside? What time is it now?
Oh gosh.
10 to 11.
Oh, this is heavy duty enough as it is. So now, if I could sum it up in the interface, regarding the interface, the Tzir of Welt, in other words, our Chesed and Gvura, can unite with God because God's the vision, the artist, has Chesed and Gvura. So that covers that. So ultimately, when you give tzedakah, there's some commonality with the idea of Chesed all the way in the vision. When I say commonality, I don't mean in any other way except that both are called Chesed. That's it.
You say in the vision, you mean higher than necessary?
No, I mean necessary Zagmuzis, which in itself, as he says, has a reshim, has also an impression from above it, and so on, because it came from there. You have a stepping stone, but here's a key thing. And I think this is where the Ein Arech comes. What you don't account for in that part of the interface. So that's what Atzilus does. Atzilus bridges Chesed and Gvura of our existence, that we can know and feel God, because Atzilus has Chachma Chesed, Bina Chesed Gvura, and it leads us all the way up to the 10 hidden spheres. I'm not getting to all the levels in between which help us, also part of the stepping. I'm just talking, the picture. So anything in this world, you study water, you can learn about Chesed. Chesed will teach you about Chesed of Yasiyah, Chesed of Yitzira, like he says in Tanya, that in the Yud spheres is in Sabish Yitzira and Abriya and Atzilus, all the way Ak, all the way to Esesir Segnosis. Fine. However, that's that. Ak will learn later in the end of this chapter what Ak does. What's missing in this aspect of the interface is the distance. That's very nice. But then I could basically come to the conclusion that water, or my Chesed, is very far from God, but they're pretty much, like I said, we're in the same league. He's higher than us. He's God, we're a creature, but it's in the same league. The Tzimtzum accounts for the jump, the sense that something is beyond us. But if you only had Tzimtzum, you'd only have Ein Arech. You wouldn't have the closeness I was talking about. You wouldn't have a relationship. Where's my chesed relate to him? So with Tzimtzum, with 10 hidden spheres of chesed and Tzimtzum, you have both elements. You have closeness because you have something that we can handle, chesed, gvura. Chachma bina, we can learn Torah, we're learning God's Torah. And the Ein Arech, the Tzimtzum, tells you that God's Chachma is completely beyond anything that you can ever relate to. And I think this answers another thing, because you asked, it's a good point. Earlier in the Hemshech, he spoke about that the Kav has an element that's Gilead Helam, an element that's Yesh Ma'ayin. So compared to the 10 hidden spheres, the spheres after the Tzimtzum are Gilead Helam. But compared to the Er HaBligvul and infinite possibilities, it's called Yesh Ma'ayin. Because, in other words, the Tzimtzum, and he said earlier that the Tzimtzum has two impacts. On Bligvul, the Tzimtzum has to completely conceal. Because as long as it's there, it's overwhelming. It will not allow the new consciousness to arise. But the Tzimtzum in the 10 hidden spheres, as far as 10 hidden spheres, is only miyut, is only diminishing. So I think that answers the question. The Tzimtzum, the real power of the Tzimtzum of the Arizal is the Shalei Be'erach, telling us that the Bli Gvul is completely beyond. And then there's an element where there's a relationship and it's only diminished. You can almost say, in an interesting way, that the Esser Spheres Hagnuzis compared to Esser Atzilus is more like the Ramak. The Ramak would work there, right. But compared to Bli Gvul, the Ramak would not work as well. So it's really the jump from Gvul to Bli Gvul that is the key thing. The Ramak, in other words, the Ramak can take us from Chesed all the way up to the highest Chesed, but he will not be able to account for the Ein Arech, right. The complete infinite distance, because there's no. Yeah. No. Go ahead.
Tzimtzum allow us to do that. And Tzimtzum, the real, where I'm understanding the real demarcation between the Ramak and the Rizal is at the point where the Ramak can take us all the way to Esser Spheres and the Genuzos, because you have Ilav Alul from there. But the ability to come to the quantum leap, which is the level of choice, which God had existed before He chose the 10 spheros, that can only come from the Rizal Tzimtzum. But the Tzimtzum of the Rizal, my understanding is, occurs much later after the Esser Spheres of Genuzos. So how does something that occurs so much later in the process come to allow us to reach a level that precedes Esser Spheres of Genuzos, which preceded it?
I'll tell you in a moment. Just one second. I'm just looking at one thing. Give me a second.
Yours is big enough.
What's up?
Oh gosh. By this class, I realized that the reason was the first quantum makubah. Because he comes to the level of understanding choice before us. Ilav Alul is already once the choice is made. Right. Cause and effect. The word probability of choice will exist. It's only. But I'm still trying to understand your second point. Your point was the one in the beginning of the class where you said Yesh Ma'ayin. Because he said that's a separate God. There's no possibility of consciousness here.
You ready for another question?
No, I'm going to answer this question. I'm just looking at something. I thought he said somewhere that it could be Mitzayer. Yev Shel Mitzayer. He doesn't use that expression here, I see.
Yev Shel Mitzayer, ma?
Okay. The answer to your question. No, he's asking the question that the Tzimtzum comes after the 10 hidden spheres, and yet it's revealing something that's higher than the 10 hidden spheres. It's not really. If you learned it earlier, you'd see it's not really a question. First of all, remember before the Tzimtzum, what's happening is the stage is being set. We're having a peak in God's mind that really we don't even deserve to have a peak, but the Tzimtzum allows us to. So we have a peak in what's going on, this artist. Infinite possibilities. I'm not even going higher than that. I'm not even talking about how he's not even an artist and he's beyond possibilities too. We're not going there. That's even higher. But let's talk infinite possibilities. As like Koydem Aleis HaRatzon. Then Aleis HaRatzon desires this possibility. And there's also the letters that he's envisioning. And all of that. But all that is now in a soup. It's a primordial, omnipresent soup called Mamala Kol HaMetzias. Ein Sof Mamala Kol HaMetzias. That's the words of the Eitz Chaim. HaMetzias. I mean, not real Metzias yet, because sometimes it says Mamala Kol HaCholol. The Chol that will be later. Everything is. This is a complete Elokus B'Pshittas consciousness. Mm-hmm. However, there God is planting seeds of what will come for only one reason: for us to be able to relate to it. So he's doing it in a way like so. Now, when we do, for example, you build a building, everyone knows you had a plan beforehand, hopefully, and a blueprint. Why? Because that's how we were created. Because that's how God. Staka baraisa or bara alma. That's what we learn. He looks in the Torah and creates the world. So now, remember, in there is also, by the way, the power of Tzimtzum. There's also envisioning, because he knows he's going to do that. Remember, it's all above time. Now comes the stage where the Tzimtzum, when the action begins. So the Tzimtzum is silencing the soup, so to speak. It's concealing it. It's not physical withdrawing, it's not Tzimtzum, it's concealing. The teacher is suddenly making room in his mind now for a student to emerge. So the fact that it happens there then doesn't mean that it's just relevant to that stage. It's taking us. It's when we're told about the Tzimtzum, it's revealing to us a power that Atzmos has that's deeper than all the revelations he has. The ability to conceal, the ability to, and it's teaching us how God is how that all those eris are infinitely distant from us. So who cares that it's coming after the 10 hidden spheres? But it's coming from a place that's from before. It's not coming from later. So that's number one. Number two, we learned clearly that Tzimtzum HaRishon has two impacts. One is it diminishes the 10 hidden spheres, but it completely conceals Siluk, completely removes the Bligvul. Because the 10 hidden spheres, like he said, he learned earlier, technically could have remained if they were just diminished. Problem is the containers wouldn't have. That's why the Eitz Chaim says, why didn't you leave a kav? Because it could have remained. That's what he explained. Because it's rooted there. The seer. But what would not have? But the Eir HaBligvul, that could not have remained in any way because it would overwhelmed everything. So bottom line is that Tzimtzum, once it happens, is revealing the infinite distance of the Bligvul. Basically, that's what it's revealing.
But the Tzimtzum that
so the fact that it comes afterwards, so what?
The reason, but couldn't we say that there's also the Tzimtzum from the Bligvul to get to Esosferos of Benuzos is a Tzimtzum?
No, there isn't, because it's all in God's mind. There's no Tzimtzum there. It's not. If there was a real Tzimtzum, then we'd have a reality existing. I don't know what you mean by Tzimtzum.
With that primordial soup, where the infinite possibilities of how the artist would create anything he wants in art, finally decides that there's going to be 10
So God has the power to have...
That is a Tzimtzum. That is contraction of the infinite possibilities to 10 possibilities.
Yeah, but that's not the Tzimtzum we're talking about.
No, but can't we say that is another Tzimtzum?
The Rebbe speaks about this, the Tzimtzumim before the Tzimtzum HaRishon. Yes, you could say... Yes, you could say it, but we're not talking about the Arizal Tzimtzum then. Then you're talking more... how from Bligvul comes Gvul, but that's not what we're discussing here. Because that doesn't change Elokus B'Pshittas. The problem, remember, that Tzimtzum solves the problem. That does not. That you could have Ir HaGvul and also be Elokus B'Pshittas, except it's in 10 spheres. So what? It's divine. It's only divine. Nothing else. There's no glove. There's no independent reality. The dilemma is in the independence that we have. That is with Tzimtzum we're talking about. That the fact that he from infinite went to finite, yes, you could say there's some type of. You could argue in many ways how you explain that, but bottom line is it's all divine consciousness there. There would be we would have no independent reality. That idea that I spoke about the hand and the glove would not be turned inside out. It'd just be okay. Instead of infinite spheres, now we have finite. It's another track, but it's all light. Yeah. And it's definitely light. It's basically Bligvul that's just manifesting in 10. That's really what you're saying. Right.
But that still involves...
Yeah, but it's not what we're just... With the Tzimtzum that the Ramak didn't know about, And what the Arizal is talking is not that. The Tzimtzum is talking about is the radical leap, the quantum leap, that allows for us to understand the infinite distance.
The consciousness. The change in consciousness. Elokus Pshitas to Ola.
Exactly.
But I think you came to the answer to that. Can I make a comment to something you just said?
Of course.
When you said that, really the whole idea is how we get from that change of consciousness from Elokus Pshitas to Olamas is Chadshus, and Olamas the Pshitas and Elokus Pshitas.
Yeah.
You said a statement that when we're going up this ladder, trying to trace up back there, maybe what it involves is turning around, walking backwards. That's unbelievable. That's really, because what is that? Like when Moshe Rabbeinu said, turn your back, you can't see my face. He's turning around. That which is a level of awe, mystique, but it's still progressing. But you're progressing in a backwards turn.
Yeah.
There's a point where that...
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly right.
Are you hiding more than you're revealing in this point?
I'm sure I am.
To avoid it?
He's simple. That's an amazing idea. You're progressing.
Listen, we can't have Klais HaNefesh yet.
Okay.
We gotta. This has to be in Kin.
Besides the mystique aspect, the whole, there's a level that you can't see, but you're still progressing. I think that's an amazing concept of what you just said. For me, I relate it to...
No, I understand. The Rebbe brings some Panim Yafas. There's a Panim Yafas. I quoted several times. A Panei Le'iroi, you're supposed to read it like this. You'll see my back and my face, but my face you'll see by not looking. There's that explanation. Yeah. And then you come to Lasla where you can look and see it also. But then there's always going to be more. But more is not a chsaron. There's nothing wrong with that. This is, you see, that's why I asked you, if it's about your comfort zone, then for sure. See, our mentality is that we finish a project and we get rewarded. And then we retire. And then we die. That's how mortal creatures think. Tzaddikim and Talmidei Chachamim, ein lehem menucha lebeil mahaza lebeil mahaba. They don't think like that. There's no such thing as the end of the week. There's no weekends. There's no end of projects. Ends are mortal. Think of end. And of course there's no end. There's stages, but there's no end. That's why I'm saying, because so people people don't like it when they hear, what do you mean? Forever? When do I stop working? Like when do I just get the reward? Schar mitzvah. So in other words, like the Rebbe said, ein lehem menucha lebeil mahaza lebeil mahaba. Then it says that Yom Shekuli Shabbos menucha. So how do you reconcile the two? On Shabbos, Elam Haba, Ein Lei Menucha, or yes Menucha. So the explanation is they have Menucha from not having Menucha. So you see, there's two ways of no Menucha. There's anxiety, agitation, tension, unhealthy. But then there's healthy, no Menucha. The Rebbe, a restless soul that doesn't want to stop is also no Menucha. But it's a no Menucha that's healthy, and we'd all aspire to. The other one, that's what people confuse. They see no Menucha as being lack of menuchas hanefesh, lack of resolution, lack of what's the word? Wholesomeness, not the wholesomeness. What's the word? Tranquility, peace, calm. Menuchas hanefesh. So the Rebbe had the deepest menuchas hanefesh at the same time en la menucha. It's not a contradiction. On the contrary, it's actually one feeds the next. A total comfort with yourself. And you're looking forever to grow. You don't need, for your security, just I finished the job and I'm ready to retire. It's hard for us to relate to because we are element b'pshitas. As soon as you get to Elokus b'pshitas, you want to just keep going. You don't want to go to sleep. Why would you want to go to sleep? There's a lot of fun going on.
It's very disturbing to me, that thing. I saw it in a sikh I looked from 40 years ago.
What's disturbing?
That the Rebbe said, I'm sure you wrote it down, but maybe it was before your time, that the person that doesn't want Messiah, it's a proof he didn't even have the mana.
He doesn't have the what?
He doesn't have the mana. Ramana writes on Messiah.
Yeah, the Rebbe.
The person doesn't want the Rebbe Messiah. The person doesn't have the vision to get more. It's proof he never had anything in the first place. Which was very shook me up.
I think we'll stop here because I can learn it inside. But I want to do for sure. It's redundant inside. It's just I feel overloaded. There's a lot of the hard drive is full, but it's enough to absorb here. I can learn it inside, but I'll do it tomorrow. Okay, let's stop here. So this is the third part of chapter 164, but I think it's very important and relevant. Yeah, the Hatamim, he talks about it. Also, Sefer Erchem, Rabbi El has some footnotes about this as well. The words of the Tzemach Tzedek are really powerful. He says like this.
Where does Torah where?
In Yonim, page Kuf Yutes. So he says like this. He says these words. This idea of total, everything is totally equal. The presence of Ein Sof. Only through the Tzimtzum. You cannot imagine it. You can't to envision it, to describe it. How do you say L'tzayir? It's like almost to paint it, to picture it. To picture it. That means with it you can picture it. It's good stuff here, huh? Yeah, page Kuf Chof. It's a mimer from, I believe it's a mimer from the Alter Rebbe. Yeah, it's a mimer from Tov Kuf Samach Beis.
You could say to model it.
Huh?
To know the form of it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Okay, so we'll stop here. A Maimon Razal in Yonim. We'll stop here. We did chapter 164. And Tzimtzum, we're dealing with the Ramak L'Yodam Inyan HaTzimtzum.